Clive Marks, Dr. Shirli, Gilbert, thank you so much for being here today. You're both here at United Nations headquarters for an event that highlights the way in which we can use the medium of the arts to convey the universal lessons of the Holocaust. This is a subject that's clearly very close to both of your hearts. Can you both tell me how you're using music to remember and help new generations learn about the Holocaust?
How do we use music to remember? Well, originally, one just knew that the events took place. And when I was asked by Alt to put together a website, the problem was really, well, that's all very well, how on earth do we get hold of the music? And that's been probably one of our biggest struggles. Thanks to Shirley, we found a tremendous amount, and we're actually having, thanks to Shirley again, and she's sort of realised my dream, and that is having actually 2 symphonies available on the website, both by Ullmann, which were transcribed from, I think, either from a piano sonata, from his 7th piano sonata and from his 5th piano sonata, having indicated before he was murdered where he would have liked the instrumentation. So various people, like a man called Mr. Wolf and another one, an Israeli conductor, worked out what it would have sounded like as the symphony. And they're both very, very interesting, especially what is known as the 2nd symphony, which comes from the 7th piano sonata. And looking for music is quite difficult. We do find things which are well known. For example, Martin used moral solidity when the whole town was flattened because of the results of what it would have been Heydrich had done. He'd murdered so many people, he wanted the whole town completely destroyed. And after a time, this beautiful threnody, lasting about 8 minutes, is performed sort of worldwide. The other great work, of course, is Schoenberg's A Survivor from Warsaw, where he describes survivors coming through the gaps in the in the drains, coming to life and then being shot. And as they're being shot, they sing the Israel prayer one says at one's death, called the Shema, and one hears the sound of galloping horses, and the music eventually fades, and it leaves the audience absolutely stunned. And those, I think, are the 2 finest pieces of music that one could possibly commemorate the Holocaust with. This is not original music, it's not taken from anything in specific. And our problem has really been to find out from the ghettos and from the camps what music really was like in those days, and we found a tremendous amount. And surely without her we wouldn't have found half of what we have found.
Shirli, can you talk us through that process? How do you find the music? What's it like when you do find it, and what are the steps that you have to take?
So it was a pretty long process. I started work on the subject when I was doing my master's, and became interested in the topic of music, partly because of the confluence of 2 different areas of my life. I was studying music at that time and had always been interested in the Holocaust as a 3rd generation. My maternal grandparents survived the war, and so I'd always been interested in the history of the Holocaust. And so began to look around, and everyone I spoke to said, you won't find any music. There isn't very much there. And basically my search took me to a lot of different countries, beginning in Israel, to Poland, to Germany, and other countries in Europe, to the United States, looking in archives and finding bits and pieces of information, some places having larger collections, other places smaller collections, but some extraordinary finds. So one of the most exciting things I found was pretty early on in my research, when I was working at the site of the former Camp Sachsenhausen, which is near Berlin, which had been in what was East Germany, and so it was a rather disorganized archive. I told the archivist what I was looking at, and she said to me, well, you're welcome to have a look in this steel filing cabinet and rifle through and see what you can find. And I found 16 original songbooks about this size that had been handwritten by prisoners in the camps and presumably hidden under their beds in the barracks, with hundreds of songs and illustrations in them, that they had used in camp sing-songs and so on. So that was just one example, but It's been a really exciting voyage of discovery to find lots of different repositories, and overall we found hundreds and hundreds of original songs in Yiddish, German, Polish, French, and a number of other different languages.
And presumably once you've found these songs, you then play them. I don't know if you play them or you have a pianist. What's it like when you have that moment where you put the music on the piano and you start playing this song that has so much history, that hasn't been heard in so long? Talk me through the emotional experience of that.
I think I want to use the word extraordinary. I think it's a complicated set of experiences. I think what struck me very early on, and what I've always found so moving about these pieces, is that they're artifacts from the time, and we tend to think of artifacts as concrete things, material objects, prisoners' uniforms, barracks, stars that prisoners were required to wear. And these songs, for the most part, were oral artifacts that survived. So the pieces of paper that I've found, those songbooks that I found in Sachsenhausen were quite an exception. Most of the pieces of paper that I've found are transcriptions that people have made after the war. And so, playing this music or singing these songs is a way of kind of bringing to life again an original artifact from the time, but a different kind of artifact, if you like, than the ones we're accustomed to finding.
And you've mentioned that you've been really inspired by the story of your grandparents. Clive, what has inspired you to search for music in this way and establish this archive?
I felt that so much of the Holocaust has been known about. One knows the unpleasant situation, more than unpleasant situation, through which people lived. Hunger in particular, fear that their loved ones were no longer alive, fear that the houses in which they lived they'd never go back to again, they'd lost all their relatives, fear, I think, for the relatives of theirs who were in neighbouring camps and knew were going to be transported off elsewhere, the fear of cold, being absolutely frozen. In other words, something that the film can't possibly register. The film is usually, a film of all this is usually registered by means of an actor who's doing his very best, made up. But he can't really act the part. He can look pained, but we all know that he is well fed. What does affect me greatly is when I see films of individuals in an emaciated position and wonder if they just can't remember anything because they look so ill and so bad, and thought, my heavens, had my great-grandparents gone to France, Belgium, Holland, instead of coming to England at that particular time, that would have been me. And in one particular movie we saw, called The Pianist, there was a scene on a Saturday afternoon where they all sat down to tea, various people were there, and I suddenly thought, that's just like my grandparents. That is their furniture, that is everything. And before the meal was over, they were all sent off to the railway station, and we saw them in abject condition, terrified, waiting for the trains to take them away. And I think well before that I knew about this particular feeling, and I felt we know roughly what the smells could have been, we know what the colour would have been through painters, but one thing we didn't know, and that was what would the sounds be. And if people were writing music, what were they singing? How could they sing? For example, the rabbis in their evening services, what tunes would they be singing? They'd be singing the traditional tunes we sing today in all points of view. Then they would have been maybe inventing new tunes. And then I thought, musicians who came with their instruments, not knowing that they were going to be taken away, extraordinarily enough, they were actually given instruments to play. What did they play? How did they get orchestras together? What were the sounds like? And I immediately became very, very interested in the Red Cross film, which the Germans allowed the Red Cross to take. And when I heard that works like it must have been Verdi's Requiem were played, I thought there's a hell of a lot of music. And only just recently it really confirmed that everything that Shirli and I have done, it said to me, we've done the right thing, because these Americans went back to Theresienstadt, to Theresienstadt, and re-performed the Verdi Requiem. Now, they were told not to play the Verdi Requiem originally because this was a sacred Catholic work, and the Catholics weren't that fond of the Jews at the best of times. But the conductor said, I want the Germans to hear this, but it comes to the dies irae, the full wrath and anger of God, will be heard and they will know what we mean. It seems they weren't clever enough even to work that out, nor were the Swiss who came who heard the same work. But after we had listened to about 2 hours, or nearly 2 hours of this, I found that one of the most moving works ever. And as I was listening, and I know Verdi's Requiem quite well, my wife and I were in absolute tears. One of the most moving things ever. So I knew definitely, beyond any doubt, that Shirley and I were doing the right thing. Although a lot of people have said, what do you want to be involved with this music for? You know, Mr. Marks, it is horrible. Why don't you let things rest? And I've had this all my life. It's usually the same old story. Clive, the war happened 20 years ago. That was one event. The war happened 40 years ago. Why do you have to keep on bringing this up? I said, because the events were so powerful that no one should ever be allowed to forget it. And these people actually wrote music. They wrote music in a way that they were either expressing what the life was outside the camp, in the fields, in the rivers, and that's what they imagined. That is where mentally they were. They were sometimes, again, they were doing exactly the opposite. They were showing us how sad they were inside the camp. And sometimes the music was just purely abstract. And of course, as you know, we lost some of the greatest composers of Czechoslovakia in that particular in those particular days, and we've lost a tremendous amount of music. In New York at the moment, there is an exhibition of interpretive art, degenerate art, and music follows from that, degenerate music. And I've been involved with a man called Michael House, who's done an immense amount of work for degenerate music, and he has unearthed for Decca Records some of the most beautiful operas imaginable, all which would have gone. Whereas in interpretive art, degenerate art, works were lost and burnt there and then. 5,000 works of art were lost. At least we can still find them, look for them, find them, and if they're not quite together, we can put them together. And this is how I've sort of reviewed art. A couple of people have said, we just can't listen to the music, it is too painful. I said, you mustn't be like that, because the people who wrote the music really wanted you to be happy, as happy as they were intellectually, and it wasn't to depress you at all. They just wanted to play. These people were musicians. They wanted to produce music and they wanted you to listen to it. Don't worry that they were murdered afterwards. We'll do that worrying. But just listen to what they actually did. And I think this is a tribute to them and a memory to them, that we have music of how they would have liked us to have heard it and never to be forgotten.
I wanted to ask about that, actually. I mean, Shirley, when you were listening and bringing these works to life, you know, when I think about it, I wonder if all of the works were, of course, extremely sad. But were there works too that surprised you in their tone or feel?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that struck me was the diversity of responses that you get in these songs. That they really are portraits of a community, which is, you know, a diverse set of individuals, you know, representing different political affiliations, different ages, different nationalities, different religions, because of course in the camps you had not only Jews, but Roma and Sinti, you had Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, lots of other groups of prisoners. And, you know, a small handful of the songs, I'd say, maybe fit our preconceptions about what would be a song that would come out of a ghetto or a camp. But there are so many songs that, you know, will talk about how people feel about the people who hold power over them, how they feel about explaining what's happening to their children, how they try to remember their past, how they try to create a sense of communal identity. Internecine struggle, so what's happening within the community? What do you think about the person who's in charge of your barracks? A lot of kind of the nuances of community life and the same kinds of things that we see in our own societies, obviously in a more extreme way, but certainly not a one-dimensional portrait of human life, but a very diverse set of responses. And that's part of why I think these are such valuable documents from the time, because they really give us a deep and nuanced and complicated sense of who were these human beings who experienced these terrible things, and how did they respond? How can we use these songs to think about them and look at them not as a faceless mass of 6 million people, but as individuals who came from different places and came with different backgrounds and understood what was happening in different ways and interpreted it in different ways and responded in different ways.
And why do you both think that it's important that the UN encourages Holocaust education and remembrance?
I think that when I've given lectures, I've been one of these wretched people who is really a failed school teacher. I should have been a school teacher years ago. I love talking to people. I love instructing them on all sorts of subjects. It doesn't have to be music, although music takes the forefront. I like talking about taxation. I was an accountant when I did my national service, talking about strategy and things like that. Business, certainly as an accountant, I like to talk about various structures of takeover, certain ethical behaviour, things like that. So therefore I was always interested in the subject. I think it's sort of terribly important that when one is lecturing to an organisation, let's say in a university, when I first gave talks on music during the Holocaust many years ago at a university, I asked for the Department of German to come down, the Department of History to come down, the Department of English and French, and tell them what I had discovered in the realms of music between 1933 and 1945. And the youngsters, not to mention the masters, were absolutely shocked. And what shocked me was they didn't know the characters involved. Goebbels, they just about knew about. Goering, they didn't know what part he took. As for Heydrich, they knew absolutely, they hadn't heard the name before. And this is not just Jewish youngsters, but anyone from the Church of England, Roman Catholics, and in America, anywhere where I've been. So one has to go very easy, and one can't expect youngsters and young people. I say youngsters, I'd like to be a youngster myself. I pretend that I am, that's part of my trouble. I feel that young people have to be encouraged to understand history. And when you understand history, then all sorts of things fit into it. And I think the history of what happened during the Holocaust affects the whole of Central European history. There is some connection between something or other in European history all the time. Taking it many steps further, one has in the way the Russians have treated their composers. I'm thinking of Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Shebelin, Khataturian, and many others. Also Miaskovsky. There was a conference in 1948 in Moscow when Shostakovich and Prokofiev and others were absolutely slated by a man called Zhdanov. He was one of the men who saved Leningrad, and Stalin got him to do this. It was a horrendous situation, one of the vilest situations in the history of judges and music. They condemned much of Shostakovich's work as being absolutely useless, and they must write in such a way as is good for the party. The suffering of the men involved, particularly a composer called Miaskovsky, who did all the things the Communist Party ever wanted him. He died of a broken heart in the same year, more or less as Stalin died, and yet for his last symphony, number 27, which I managed to get a performance of in this country, his music still lives. Now this wasn't the Holocaust, this was something else, very, very similar. And in China you had the Cultural Revolution, and the way the Chinese professors and teachers and people who had an intellect were treated, the situation has gone on. And I think in Afghanistan I'd be very interested to find out more about music in Afghanistan and the harassment of women or anybody else who sings, even at home privately. And all music seems to be a very, very dangerous subject, and can be a very, very dangerous subject, depending how it's used for propaganda, for marching songs, and for just a warning something terrible is going to happen. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da 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 da. We had that call sign on a timpani throughout the war, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, and you knew it was going to be an announcement. I remember as a schoolboy, just about a schoolboy, hearing this and said, we will stand by. Dad, come down. Mum, come down. Someone's going to say something important. So I regard music as a horn call, a call to action, as something which is, since it can be used in most marvelous places to soothe one, to bring back happier memories, to calm people down, and to arouse them as well. A good German marching song certainly gets me going.
And what does it mean for you to bring that message to the UN of the power of music, particularly in this context with remembering the Holocaust?
I would like people to know the dangers of music, and when music is interfered with, something or other is very serious. In other words, if there's going to be dictatorship in music, there is a hell of a lot of trouble about. And I think that music can bring such help to people who are sad, and music can warn people there are dangers, and music can say things. For example, in Arthur Honegger, in his Second Symphony, he writes about the streets of Paris during the German occupation of Paris, writes about the streets on a wet Sunday afternoon, and you actually feel, you can see the greyness of it all, and the slow movement is equally desperate. And then in the finale, he uses a chorale, the tune of which he wrote himself, comes right at the very end, and although the work is a symphony for strings only, there's invariably a trumpet added to the orchestra so the chorale can be played, and it's the most glorious ending of any symphony that I know. And that was actually flown by the partisans to England to be broadcast. The parachute landed in East, so I'm told, and you see I'm trying to get people to find out. This is part of our problem, the interest of all this. I'm trying to get people to find out for me, where did it fall, who took it to the BBC, how did they know to take it to the BBC, and take it to, there's a doctor, a very famous doctor who had his string orchestra, and they gave it to him, and he performed the work, and all the French listened to it. And we have at our website a young lady who got a first-class degree at Oxford, and one of it was the codes used by the French partisans in getting music to, or getting information to various centres by the use of music. What the music sounded like I do not know, I have to ask more about it. And she at the moment is going to find out more for me on this, of how that music was dropped and why. And
so this is an ongoing project?
I think it's an ongoing project, because we've got to a plateau, a very good plateau. This is a moment to stop and say, okay, I have to raise more funding for this, and I think there are other things to bring in the rest of Europe, the rest of the world, because there are massacres in connection with music. I used to go out to Cambodia quite frequently, and I went to their Tol Sling prison in their capital, and it's laid out very much like Yad Vashem. And in this particular city, which is the capital of Cambodia, a man, because he had sung certain songs, his name was Sizamut or something like that, ends in Sizamut, and was a great, they say he was as popular as Frank Sinatra in his day. He bit his tongue off, and he wanted to die, and of course he died through loss of blood, and other musicians were executed. So apart from other terrible places, you have even in unknown to people in Cambodia, these sort of things. And eventually, when we get this right, it is right now, but I hope that those who work with me will say, okay, Clive, if you want to do that, do it by yourself. Or, okay, include us in, that's equally fine. We haven't got to that stage yet, but we have ideas. We think about it all the time.
And Shirli, finally, how does it feel to bring this body of work and research to the UN and be able to present it here? How does it feel personally for you?
It feels like an amazing opportunity, I think, to expose this music. I think from the beginning it's felt really important to me to take these songs literally out of the archive and put them before the public. I think, you know, as I traveled through these archives and found these papers, these songbooks or whatever they were in these dusty archives, I really had the sense that these were monuments of a different kind, but monuments to the communities that were destroyed that the public simply had never seen. And I feel extraordinarily privileged to be able to expose some of this music and bring it to a wider audience and encourage people to come and look at our website and see the music that's up there, and hopefully inspire more research, because there is a lot more music out there, to inspire more people to go and look for it and find more of these extraordinary works.
Shirli, Gilbert, Clive Marks, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.